Hello, and welcome to Woman with Bunny Ears, Season 3, Episode 7, a Twin Peaks podcast, also known as We Want Headbands, a 4-syllable and 1-character podcast in Baseline, where we will be discussing Project Lawful, aka Planecrash, Book 10 again, and we'll be doing listener feedback and digressions. I am your host. I didn't think of anything to call myself. Gains from trade, flashy man.
And I am your co-host. Gains from trade on my side. Cakoluchiam.
Nice. All right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we've got enough digressions that I've cut out of last week's recording that I don't think we need to go down those specifically. I think let's keep it targeted to digressions on listener feedback.
Right.
How does that sound?
Right. I'm just warning the listeners that there will be digressions at the end of this episode.
Yes.
That we cut out of the other episode. Let's see. Well, we have a big list that goes in no particular order. After we ended our session the other day, I remarked that, most websites will say join the conversation, and then it's just a discordant comment section. Whereas we say join the Discord, but you can actually have a conversation with people. So it really says a lot about society when you think about it.
Yeah. Well, that the sane people live in a chat service called Discord. I mean, hopefully sane people. I'm sure there are plenty of insane people too.
It's true.
I usually get very well-reasoned conversations in Discord, both in that server and in the other servers I'm in. So, yeah.
True.
Yeah. So, speaking of sane and insane people, we do have some word of God from the Discord. Eliezer hopped in to weigh in on my long and confusing conversation about unskilled labor hours as currency. And he did a lot of talking, as he does. So I've clipped out what I think are a good summary of what he's got, and it's still quite a lot, but let me just start off. He says, Dathalon does have an artificial currency used as a medium of exchange, meant to track the value of unskilled labor hours, note unskilled qualifier, and they're regularly auctioned in TaskRabbit-like markets about that. And this currency also serves as the notional definition of a medium of account because it fluctuates less than unskilled labor prices. The currency is ones and zeros rather than paper currency. Dathalon would find the idea of paper currency ludicrous from the standpoint of their security mindset, because obviously a super criminal could always figure out how to counterfeit it, unless every bill contained a constantly tracked chip. Nobody is supposed to be holding currency. It's strictly a medium of exchange to instantiate a unit of account, not at all a store of value. Value is held in investment accounts. So I think that has some elements of what my impression of unskilled labor hours was, in that by putting it as a currency, it speaks for like a general sense of, among the public, on average, what can unskilled people do, basically. And it fluctuates less than unskilled labor prices, as in, like, I personally value my time this way, which would be me setting a price, versus this currency setting the values. So, like, one person can't take over the market by declaring their price.
So is the point that it's not like each individual person's price for their unskilled labor hour? It's just like the market price for an unskilled labor hour?
So I think he gets into it in more detail, but the gist is that it's not the market price of unskilled labor. It is a centrally managed, determined value of unskilled labor that is meant to track with how valuable it is relative to things in current economy. And he specifically says if it, being the money, would otherwise be an attractive investment, the currency authority will cause all accounts holding their medium of exchange to lose 5% of notional value per year or some such. So the currency authority does control literally all of the money that is out there as far as currency goes. And it's actually not that big of a thing because there isn't that much money out there. The money sort of only instantiates itself for the purposes of making a trade of other things like investments, equity. That
I'm sort of confused why they don't just have the anarcho-capitalist solution to money, where, as many people as want can have their fiat currency, and you just pick the fiat currency of the guy who you think manages his fiat currency and trade between them with other people. Yeah, that's right. Why don't you have an even more utopian idea for how money works?
Well, I think, and now I am not word of God saying this, but my
Okay.
impression is that the currency authority is basically optimized in a way such that people trust it, or maybe not optimized, but like having enough power such that people trust it and can't get enough momentum behind a Dogecoin or Ethereum or whatever, because why bother? Currency is only used briefly for trading other things. You don't actually hold on to it much. Okay. So this part of this big long conversation was about the idea of there being inflation or deflation. I think it was triggered by the phrase downward price stickiness. So, on the topic of deflation, Eliezer says there's also a coordination problem when you have a complicated supply chain. Everyone wants to be first in line to raise prices, but everyone wants to be last in line to lower prices, which is why inflation causes less damage than deflation. So instead, there's a thrice annual price adjustment day when everybody renegotiates the prices simultaneously so that they can go down in something like lockstep. So they've got the purge 4 times a year, which I learned a new word, thrice. Although that is basically the same as quarterly.
Stands for fried rice.
That too.
Yes. Also, I think it's a bad word because nobody knows it, and it sounds far too much like thrice, which is a word people do know.
Exactly. Especially probably over audio medium like this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
People who cannot see my lips doing the F instead of the TH. Anyhow, that's one of those digressions we're not supposed to have, I think. So there's a little bit more from Eliezer before we move on to other things. Because another thing that's part of this conversation about downward price stickiness is the very serious people who have a problem with it. And Eliezer says Dathalon's very serious people are of the opinion that Dathalon should have had an inflationary unit of account tied to an NGDP level target, but this is, alas, one of the places where it would be genuinely hard for even Dathalon to refactor itself that hard. Dathalon's system is not meant to be superior to an NGDP LT indexed inflationary unit of account, holding fixed the part about stores of value being held mainly in equities and the land taxes and so on. They're just legit not at the optimum here. And they got to their current position via NGDP LT having not been invented by the time of the historical screen, and earlier generations being not quite that smart and being more bullheaded about, quote,
downward nominal wage rigidity is a bias, and we will train people out of it and coordinate around lowering prices successfully so we can retain our idealistic commitment to the unit of account being something that everyone could personally sell.
Nice.
That is something I will have edited into the voice of Otolmens because Eliezer typed it in alternating all caps and regular text, and I just will perpetually associate that now with Otolmens.
Yes. This was also something we thought about whilst we were riffing, because I realized that the voice of Nethys in the audiobook is Stephen Merchant, who is Wheatley in Portal 2, the video game. And then the voice of Otolmens is the voice of GLaDOS, also from Portal.
Which is a appropriate assignment for those two being sort of in opposition to each other in both settings.
True. And, Wheatley is more like the Joker.
Yeah.
In his particular setting. So anyway, my prediction is that if we ever hear Pharasma speak, her voice will be Cave Johnson from Portal 2.
I love that idea. I hope we actually haven't heard Pharasma speak yet so that can be implemented.
I think there's a joke about how Pharasma never says anything, so I think we might be safe.
Anyhow, back to NGDP, which is a acronym for nominal gross domestic product, which is a thing that if you don't understand that, we will have to direct you toward a college course, which actually you might not get because I think that part of our conversation was cut out. You'll get it in the outtakes later, I promise.
Oh no, this is bad news because I was hoping they would take a microecon class, but GDP is macroecon, so now they have to go take a second class.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, in that case, let's give them an opportunity here,
Right.
and then we can come back. So go ahead, take your macro econ course. We'll wait.
Level, 100 should be fine.
All right. So welcome back. Now that you understand what NGDP is, we can go back to this comment from Eliezer, which is interesting because he admits that Dathalon is just not optimum here. That means that Keltham's weirdness is actually something that Eliezer probably thinks is good or appropriate, I should say.
Does Keltham think they ought to use a different currency?
I think it says Keltham thought they should use a different currency.
I thought that was like a Dathalon aside.
Oh, was that a Dathalon thing?
Oh.
Anyhow, the important point being that Dathalon, despite being median Eliezer, is not necessarily on a macro scale in alignment with Eliezer's morals and preferences about government and economic management, such.
True. Yeah.
So we should probably think about this more in a death of the author sense while reading, because now I think this has proven that we may not be able to predict what is going to be correct regarding Dathalon or Keltham.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, that was cool that we got those comments. That's like extra free book. It's like a whole new Dathalon aside.
Yeah. I should also note that this was not just Eliezer spieling at us. This was a conversation with Oscar Non-Deterministic Polymath, who was asking very intelligent questions, which I have left out because there's already way too much in the answers, and I think you're probably more interested in the answers.
Yeah. So let's see. The next thing we were discussing at one point is how there are these gods, right? And then there's also Ptolemens, who's kind of a god of the gods, sort of. But really, Pharasma is the god of the gods, and Ptolemens reports up to her. And this reminded me of the apropos Stephen Cass tweet, "Object gods have metagods up in their skies to smite them, and metagods have metagods, and so on ad infinitum."
Where does it end?
It's ad infinitum. It
Ad infinitum.
doesn't end.
Indeed. It's out there in the universe where Keltham is still trying to figure out whether the person under the effect of Abadar's truth-telling is able to deceive him. So,
Get your reference.
you don't really. Oh, that was in his first exploration of Abadar's truth-telling. He somehow realized that it is potentially possible for this spell to be faked, that the symbol on the subject's forehead could be an illusion that anybody else could cast. And so he asked, what spells can fake this, and how can I defeat that fakery? And then how can a wizard defeat my defeating of that fakery? And so on.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that part.
So I don't think we got a good conclusion to well, I think we got an appropriate conclusion to that, which is the rest of the story. We are not out an infinitum with him. You also have another comment about Thelem, right?
Yeah. Well, it was prompted by the fact that Thelem occurred in our last reading, and then we got that excerpt from the first post of Planecrash. And in the first post it says,
"This is a woman reading Alt 9, Book 3 of Reckless Investor Meows For, a book series not entirely ungermane to his own life interests. Keltham takes out his own copy of 3 to Infinity by Petheriel, reading it long enough for it to be a costly signal that he actually cares about the book's content."
But if you look at it spelled out, it's pretty clearly a reference to Peter Thiel, who wrote the investing book 0 to 1.
Oh. So
I'm going to double check that.
Some author in Dathalon has written at least one sequel to this story.
Wait, what?
To 0 to 1, that is.
Oh, yes. Well, you see, it's funny because here on Earth, we have to go from 0 to 1. But on Dathalon, they're already so adequate that they go from 3 to infinity.
Indeed. We'll get there someday.
That's also probably a reference to Yudkowsky's conception of recursive depth, where if something can recurse in infinite number of times in principle, in practice, it's only going to go to 3, which is a very funny observation.
And that's approximately the level of meta we got in that earlier discussion about counterspells.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. Let's see. What else is in that bit? Okay, so there's also Reckless Investor Meows For, which I sort of just assumed was a reference to the very thing we were reading at the time. you know? Mad
Yeah.
Investor Chaos, Reckless Investor Meowsfor. I don't really know anything else that would go to.
Yeah.
And then the book series is described as Alt 9 Book 3. So I assume an alt book is just like here's like a fan fiction book basically, and that's just one of their practices.
I
That
think
makes sense.
I think alts is one of the glowfic terms because your character could have alternate versions going in different people's stories.
Sure.
Like Keltham could be a character in another story, but does not remember things that happened in this story, and this Keltham does not remember things that happened in that story, so it would be a different alt of Keltham.
You know, by misremembering and misunderstanding various things in this story, we're making our own alt as we go along. Maybe many.
Indeed.
Yes.
And inspiring the listeners here to make their own alts in their heads based on our interpretations. Again,
Yeah.
how far does it go?
Nope, that's it.
That's it. That's 3 levels.
This is as far as it goes.
So there is a correction to something I said earlier about Dathalon having sanctioned domestic violence, so long as you put $1 in an account each time. Lord Sirth points out that the money is put into the kid's account anytime you tell them do this or slap, regardless whether the slapping happens. So it's not just you pay for the privilege to hit your kid. It's you pay for the privilege to threaten your kid with being hit, which is a bit nicer.
Did you double check this correction? Because
I
I was
did.
definitely under the same impression you were before this correction.
Yeah,
So that's interesting.
Keltham says every time you set up a situation where a kid gets told that they need to do something or else get slapped on the wrist, you also add some value to an investment account the kid gets access to when they're older. So
Okay.
I
So it's
misinterpreted that. I read the
right.
last sentence of that paragraph, which, to be fair, also says something different from what I interpreted. It says having to pay that amount to set up a potential wrist slap situation reminds adults to check every time whether they really needed a wrist slap there. So I took
it's really
the last
about
5 words there and
right.
ignored the context. And I'm sorry, I was wrong. Thank you, Lord Zerth, for pointing that out.
So it's really about aligning the adults' incentives to Dathalon and not like rebellious children, I suppose. I guess it does
Yeah,
both.
that does bring up another potential problem, which is if the kid gets the money, whether or not they get wrist slapped, they are slightly incentivized to misbehave because sometimes they will not get a wrist slap. And so if they misbehave just enough that they are indifferent between their misbehavior and the wrist slap, they can get money out of misbehaving.
It's moral hazard.
Moral hazard indeed, and potentially not get the wrist slap. Yeah. So it's unclear to me how they would pass that lesson on to the kid. Maybe they just keep the investment part secret, and that's one of those like spoiler things that society has generally agreed you need to be gated into knowing that you
Maybe.
get money every time your parent threatens you.
Maybe they're just thinking like the child's time horizons will be so much narrower than like a decade. Like getting $1 in a decade would not really motivate me to do any. Although I'm not. Again, I don't know how much it actually costs.
I thought it said how much value it was and that it was supposed to be a disincentive for the parent as well, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe $1, maybe $1,000. How much is the privilege to beat your child worth to you?
Again, you keep using the word beat. I don't know if it's really about that.
I know.
Uh,
I understand that the popular opinion among society tends to equate any amount of violence with the extreme amount of violence.
True.
People are not making a distinction between spanking your kid when they're misbehaving and just straight up whipping your kid with a belt when you come home drunk. Like, those are very different things in my mind, but they tend to be lumped together when people talk about hitting kids.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm being part of the problem by calling wrist slaps beatings, but uh, I was being hyperbolic intentionally in this case.
Mhm. Mhm. Ah, for the purposes of humor.
A little bit, yeah. Uh, so Lord Sirth has another correction for me, which is that oath breaking just shifts you chaotic and sometimes evil depending on your reason, so it only reliably sends you to Abaddon if you're already lawful evil. And this is in reference to my having called oaths the equivalent of committing your soul to be eaten.
Right.
Which I don't
Hmm.
know if they clarified that exactly for Keltham, but it's good to have that clarification for us at least that, lawful good people can still make oaths without risking going to Abaddon.
I wonder if you can do the opposite and, like, on your deathbed, just make 100,000 oaths, and then, like, you keep all of them because they're all like oaths, like, I will never betray you, and then you just die. So, like, life hack.
Life hack, make oaths on your deathbed.
Yeah,
And then
it's
sell
free.
futures for them while you can benefit from the value. Although I guess, yeah, in the case of Abaddon versus Hell, if you do decide that being tortured for eternity is worse than oblivion, that does give you an out, basically. If you can make oaths and break them enough on your deathbed
Mhm.
to shift your alignment to chaotic, you can
Sure.
avoid going to hell.
Right. That's the idea. That's the idea. Although maybe once you have a contract, you can't do that anymore.
Hmm.
Uh, then we're just back to the discussion of how fast can somebody
Can
go
they
around
sign?
breaking oaths and then die before they
Hmm.
get like caught and maledicted or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me that when I first looked at this story, it had the warning like, this is in a country ruled by the literal forces of literal hell. I was like, oh, it sounds rather horrifying. But so far, I am not horrified. Uh, obviously, if these things really happened, they would be pretty horrifying. But just in terms of, like, reading a book, I'm like, they're evil. Nice.
Hmm. Literal hell. Yeah. I think that is all the quick comments.
Oh, I have a couple.
You have more?
Yeah, yeah. For some reason, in our discussion about intelligence and wisdom D&D or Pathfinder scores, I said intelligence is about how fast you think, and wisdom is about knowing how the world works, because that's basically what they mean in, like, real life conversation. But if my understanding of D&D and Pathfinder is correct, intelligence is actually about knowing a lot of facts about the world. Which I guess is also a different sense of intelligence, like military intelligence in real life. And then I suppose Keltham would have a lot of facts about, like, a parallel world and maybe even his universal laws.
Yeah. So in Pathfinder, I can kind of answer this, which is the knowing facts about the world. In several role-playing systems, particularly those based on Dungeons and Dragons, including Pathfinder, there are actually skills associated with knowledge, and they are intelligence-based, usually, but there is a knowledge religion skill that is how much stuff you know about religion. There is a knowledge arcana skill, which is how much you know about magic. And there are other knowledge, I believe knowledge nobility is one. Yeah, there's a short list here of there's arcana, dungeoneering, engineering, geography, history, local, nature, nobility, planes, and religion. So each of those are about knowing facts, and they are intelligence based. But intelligence itself, I think, is also like your interpretation of real world intelligence, which is how fast you think. And it's used as a casting stat for wizards who memorize their spells. They need to be able to recall all the motions and ingredients and such in order to cast their spells quickly.
Nice. All right. Well, then let us discuss something that I think we both have a hunch will take us a long time.
I suspect, yes.
We were having a conversation over there in the Discord. You and I believe Lord Sir were discussing whether or not avoiding pain was a terminal value.
This goes
And
back to the wrist slaps specifically, or the negative wrist slaps specifically.
I see. Yeah, I just walked in, so I didn't. I just said, "Hey, philosopher," and you were saying some very strange stuff, and that's when we discovered that apparently you don't find pain unpleasant, which is a remarkable discovery to me, and makes you uniquely suited to read this story.
Right. So, I think the biggest part of this for me is the notion of pain, or rather, negative pain, being a terminal value. That what you want most in the world, or among the things that are your goals for existence, is reducing or eliminating pain. And I disagree with that, because I consider pain to be necessary sensation or stimulus. It's kind of like smell, taste, hearing, touch, the other associated senses that people have. And I think mostly for me, in itself, pain is not the unpleasant part of things that cause pain. But the unpleasant part for me is being distracted. And I don't just mean that in the sense of like, when I am in pain, I am thinking about pain, but also when I am in pain, because I am thinking about pain, or because I am tending to that wound, or whatever, it robs me of agency. And so the terminal value that I associate with negative pain isn't getting rid of pain, it's being able to do the things that I want to do, basically. Having power, having agency.
Yeah, well, I think we would all agree that, pain is obviously a signal that unfortunately has some use.
Right.
The rest of us at least just don't like being in it of itself. And I suppose the fact that once you've been injured, you have to go nurse that wound for a while is the rest of us also dislike. But we would count the actual sensation of pain up there in the old negative scorecard.
So I think one thing is that maybe I don't define pain the same way other people define pain. Because I do think being in pain, like, if you have constant back pain for no good reason, or, there are several medical conditions that just cause people to be in constant pain forever, essentially. I do consider that bad, but I don't think that is bad because it is pain. I think it is bad because it is pain when you don't want pain. It's not helpful pain. It is not useful. There's nothing you can do about it. And I consider pain basically to be the stimulus that says whatever you're doing is or will cause you damage. And that sensation goes to your brain and is interpreted as pain and causes you to stop doing whatever it is. So that, I think, is useful, and I don't think getting rid of that is a good terminal value or a good thing to call a terminal value. But, for example, if you are being held against your will and tortured, there's very little you can do about, whether your skin is flayed or you're set on fire or whatever. There's nothing you can do about it. I do think not having pain then is a good thing, because
Well, that's far less interesting.
you don't want to, right? You don't want to sense pain right there. You want to focus on something else, like, how do I get out of this situation? The how, not the I need to instinctive thing.
What if it were simply impossible to get out of the situation? And
then I don't think pain is an appropriate sensation there. And that's just like there are people who constantly smell burning hair or something. They just have that smell constantly in their brain. Smell itself is not something that we should be avoiding, but smell when you don't want smell is a problem. I call that suffering, basically. So having a stimulus that tells you to stop doing something when you aren't doing something, or when you don't have agency to change things, is suffering. It's not a thing you can get rid of. And
I think that's a different... Oh, I don't know, actually. Is that just like you're stipulating that's the definition of suffering you're working with? Or do you mean that to just be like you're telling us that you only feel unpleasantness in those situations?
So the example I gave, or one of the examples I gave in this conversation, was I pulled a hangnail the other day. And pulling the hangnail was fine because I was doing it and I was continuing to do it, and I decided that I wanted to pull the hangnail. And so it was causing me pain, which was signaling to me I should not do this. According to evolutionary psychology, or whatever, that associates that kind of damage with you are taking damage, that is very bad, stop taking damage. And so feeling pain then, I think, is totally appropriate, because what it's doing is it's giving me stimulus that allows me to make a decision whether I want to continue doing the thing that is painful, or whether I want to stop doing that. And being a conscious agent with free will, I can make that choice. And pain is just an input that informs that choice. However, after I pulled the hangnail, it still hurt. I still have pain on that finger from where I pulled the hangnail. That pain is useless. And it is a sensation that I am continuing to feel, but the reason I don't want that isn't because it is painful. It's because I am currently distracted from whatever it is I'm doing, because I am paying attention to that sensation. Just like, if there was somebody with terrible body odor sitting next to me, I might not be able to focus on reading the book I am trying to read because I am getting olfactory sensation when I don't want to. And
Is
that's
it
bad.
important to your
Go ahead.
example that the olfactory sensation could be unpleasant? What if there was the sense of cookies here? Okay? Or
So
I don't
make
know,
it perfume.
cinnamon.
Perfume is
Sure,
not
yeah.
terribly unpleasant unless you have allergies to it. But the constant smell of perfume can be a bad thing. It's distracting, and so not having it is important. And there are, workplaces where people sit together for long periods of time very often have do not wear perfume policies because of that, because people get distracted by having that sensation constantly.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
But in my ideal world, I don't think there should be no pain.
How ideal are we talking here? Like, what if your
Okay, yeah.
body were indestructible?
If my body were okay, in my ideal world where everybody gets to live in the Matrix with Neo degree of control over everything, I don't want there to be pain because pain is pointless there. Because any choice you make, you can affect that change. But in a world where there are consequences to your actions, having a sense that will inform you of the consequences to those actions, and in the case of pain, that can be, again, pulling a hangnail, that is, you are tearing your skin, or I like the feeling of heat, and I like the feeling of heat enough that I will put my hand over a fire, but only for a time, because eventually my skin will get damaged, the nerve endings will hurt, the skin will get charred, etc. And at that point, I know there is damage. The pain is a signal that I should avoid damage. I should take my hand away. But as a conscious agent, I can decide when I want to take my hand away. So in my ideal world, so long as there exist things like fire, so long as there exist things that can damage you, so long as people are not completely immortal, I think pain is important. And it should not be a terminal value to eliminate pain.
I
And I feel...
wonder if. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I wonder if you're just understanding the term terminal value differently. Because I think, everyone basically agrees that pain is a signal and we have it evolutionarily because it is useful. We just also don't want to be in pain, and that's one of our terminal values. Like, usually, if I was in pain and you came along and you said, for $1, I will make you not be in pain, I would take that trade, like, almost every time. Unless it's basically impossible for you to offer me that trade faster than I could notice I was in pain and take appropriate action. So, but I'll just trade that off against my other terminal value. It's it being a terminal value, or some component of it being a terminal value. It's just a statement about, like, we don't purely care about avoiding pain because we want to avoid damage to our bodies, or some more complicated expression about, like, I don't know, because if you go farther enough with your theory, it seems to suggest you could construct an even more complicated thing that you are terminally trying to avoid. But
so I
the rest
think
of us go for pain, by which I mean we avoid it.
I do think pain is an instrumental, or alleviation of pain is an instrumental value. I do think there's something behind that, namely avoiding damage. But I think if I'm going to, like, go all the way down that chain to, like, what fundamental things are the terminal values that I would not, or that I think are worth calling terminal values, are the ability to make choices, so free will, the ability to do whatever you want which is the ability to when you make a choice, have the consequences of that choice go the way you want them to go. And then the third would be consciousness, the ability to perceive all of this stuff. And those are my main three terminal values. And pain is, or getting rid of pain is something that allows me to achieve the terminal value of being able to make a decision. Because if I have pain, then I'm distracted and I can't make the decision the way I want to make the decision. If instead I lived in a world where I didn't have pain and I just naturally avoided things that dealt me damage, the natural avoidance of things that deal me damage means that I'm being controlled in that case. I feel like anytime you take away a sense or an ability to respond to a sense or what is giving you that sensation, you lose a bit of free will.
I'm tempted to say, free will is when you choose choices, and the more choices you choose, the freer your will is.
Right. I think that's correct. So there is sort of a fourth thing that I would value, which is some degree of diversity. Things existing in the universe such that I have a meaningful choice to make. We're not all gray goo. I can choose whether to go left or to go right. And picking one or the other will actually result in a different experience.
Is one of your terminal values like feeling nice?
What is feeling nice?
Oh, when you feel pleasant.
Like, what is pleasant? I feel like that's a word that people assign value to, but no definition.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can't give it, a definition per se.
Like when I think
Because
of feeling pleasant, I think of not being distracted by anything.
Okay.
But being
surely,
able to focus on whatever I want to focus on. It's pleasant to sit and read a book.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I would just elucidate you with examples. Like, when you see something funny, people often find that pleasant. When you go for a nice walk or eat delicious food.
Yeah, and that's sort of the experience of diversity, right? Or of chaos, randomness.
Well, it can't just be that, because certain things are more pleasant than others, even though they're equally diverse.
But why? In what way?
Uh,
So I actually talked
yeah.
about this with my spouse last night, and they gave me an example of I give you a Hershey's Kiss and a Jolly Rancher. What makes you choose which one to eat or which one to eat first, depending, right? And ostensibly the choice, one would say, comes down to which is more pleasant when you eat it. Which do you, quote unquote, like more? And I see them as qualitatively different, not quantitatively different. Like, it's not one is more unpleasant than the other or more pleasant than the other. It's just that they stimulate different senses. And sometimes I want this sense to be stimulated, and sometimes I want this other sense to be stimulated.
I feel that we could simply construct a ratio of the amount of times when you want a certain sense stimulated. And this would tell us something about what things you find pleasant.
Yeah, and that's sort of the weird part about free will is you having preferences about things, like choosing which candy to put in your mouth.
But I'm saying, surely I mean, are there any flavors you don't like? It's kind of cheating for me to ask that, but I'm going to.
No, that's a fair question, and I can say there was a flavor that I don't like, but there's a lot of stuff that I just don't care about. I can imagine something like licorice flavor. I do like licorice flavor, but some people don't. And since I can't think of something I don't like, let's just pretend that the thing I don't like is licorice right now.
Right. Okay. So imagine, there are 3 distinct flavors you don't like and 3 distinct flavors you do like. And I come up to you and I say, Kako, I have on one hand these 3 pieces of candy with tastes you don't like, and on the other 3 pieces of candy with tastes you do like. Which of these do you want? And that's an example of how it can't just be diversity, because they're equally diverse on the bad side than the good side.
And there is a idea of preference of what I want over what I don't want, but at its fundamental level, I think it still comes down to what is going to prevent me from doing the thing I want to do. And
Right. I mean,
if
that
I
kind of.
ate some licorice, I would have a bad taste in my mouth. That would be distracting. And that's the reason it's bad, is I don't want to be thinking about the thing in my mouth. I don't want to be focusing on the thing in my mouth. I just want to be playing this video game I'm playing or making this podcast that I'm making. But if I am completely idle with, nothing to do, no objects that I want to achieve, I might pick the licorice because I'm curious, maybe. And I've actually thought about this a lot in terms of pain. Also, one of the things that I think about sometimes is, ever since I was young, about high school age, I had an idea of what tattoo I would like to have if I had a tattoo. And I have that picture in my mind, and I know where on my body I want to put it. But I don't want to have that permanent feature, that permanent change to my body. And that preference for not having a permanent change to my body outweighs my preference for, I want to go get a tattoo right now. However, if for no cost I could get a tattoo that goes away immediately, I might do that. That sounds fine. Getting stabbed with a needle. If I don't have anything else to do and I'm not losing money on it, experiencing that pain is fine. And I want sometime to know what it feels like to have a limb cut off, let's say. I feel like I would have a better perspective on the world. I would understand things better. I would be closer to the me that I want to be if I knew what that felt like. But I don't want to cut off my arm. I don't want to have that feeling.
I think it's very simple to imagine
I
what
don't
it would
want
feel like to have your arm cut off.
I don't want to risk bleeding to death. I don't even want to have the scar that happens when I cut my skin. And that priority means I don't get to experience that pain. And it makes me sad sometimes.
What if the pain wasn't interesting at all? Huh?
It's such a weird idea to me that other people might not feel that way, might not want to know what it feels like to be stabbed or to be kicked in the balls, for people who don't have balls, that, there are these things that you might never experience. Do you not feel loss for not having that experience?
I mean, people who have experienced it don't really seem to enjoy the experience. So
Right. And again, being kicked in the balls, not a pleasant experience. I can say, as far as pleasant things go, that is not among them. But I think primarily for me, there are two reasons it is not pleasant. One is I'm being damaged. I don't want to be damaged. And the other is once the shoe leaves my groin, I am still feeling pain. I am very distracted by that pain. I am not able to get up and move on with my life. And that I do not like. I do not like having that that control taken away from me. Not being able to make decisions about myself because my body is forcing me to sit there clutching my groin.
Are there any other reasons why you wouldn't want to be kicked in the balls?
Like I said, the damage, obviously. I
Well,
would like
that was
to.
one of the reasons that's
Um,
accounted for.
I mean, there could be like the social experience or the social effects. Being that guy who got kicked in the balls might
Ignore
not.
that. It happens in secret. I don't know.
Happens in secret. Yeah.
I'm just trying to, pull you because most people are like, no, I wouldn't want to be kicked in the balls because it hurts.
But I will admit this is a thing that is strange. That I observe there are people who do not believe they have the same drive behind their preference not to get kicked in the balls or whatever. That they think that pain itself is bad. And that's confusing to me.
I forgot to say this earlier. And I don't think anyone was actually confused by this, but the reason, like, the terminal value is not actually avoiding pain. Let us say it's only that pain happens to feel unpleasant. It is itself tied up with displeasure. That is why most people have avoiding it as a terminal value. You can imagine.
But again,
alternative.
That's the same thing for having somebody with extraordinarily strong perfume sitting next to you. That's very unpleasant, and you want to avoid that. But sometimes you like perfume. Sometimes there are times when it's not useless. And so why aren't people railing
That's
against
unpleasant in a different way, though.
the railing against the sense of smell as a concept? Why isn't avoiding the sense of smell, eliminating the sense of smell, a terminal goal for people? The same way eliminating pain is a terminal goal for people because sometimes it's very unpleasant. Like that.
Yeah, I think pain is basically just always unpleasant I stipulate they're talking about the unpleasant instances of pain, which I also stipulate is almost all of them.
So I think it may have been you who mentioned capsaicin, spicy things. My understanding is that does stimulate the same nerves that other pain that people feel is stimulated by. But people eat spicy food. People like spicy food.
It's hard to say what's going on there because people aren't like putting spicy food on their skin.
Some people do.
Much fewer.
Speaking of people who do weird things that are painful, I just watched a video on the fad of taking ice baths. Lots of people love sitting in a bucket, a bathtub full of ice. They think it's great. That I don't know if there's any way to say that is not painful. That there is no pain associated with that, and that the sensation.
I don't know. I mean, I find it painful, but I've always assumed they don't. Actually, I'm not even sure it's technically pain. It's just a different unpleasant sensation that I assume they find pleasant. I'm not a doctor, though. Maybe it is. You carried by nociceptors or something.
But then there's also kinds of pain that people enjoy, like when you're itchy, you enjoy having that itch scratched, and sometimes you enjoy being scratched, or as some people might call it, being scritched, just for its own sake, not because it's alleviating an itch. It's not an instrumental value goal. It's just for its own sake. So why is that pain appropriate? Why is having that pain appropriate, but not having any other pain is also important?
I mean, I think when people scratch themselves, and I've just tested it myself, it's lower on the amount of intensity you would need to cause actual pain, which I know because I tested myself, and then I upped the intensity, and now my forehead kind of hurts. But
right. But
yeah,
what is
so
the
that's
difference
not pain.
between intense pain and not intense pain?
Well, it isn't.
In the case
It
of
isn't even
scratching,
pain. Yeah.
in the case of scratching, the difference is either you are damaged as a result of the thing that causes intense pain, or it lingers. It's distracting. It is no longer serving the purpose of answering the question, what does scratching myself feel like?
I can assure you it was unpleasant in the moment. But yes, I think my theory is that everybody's wired up a little bit different, and you've gotten lucky, sir. You will now be able to stoically endure many of life's slings and arrows.
I think this is I empathize a lot with Carissa.
Right.
To bring it back to the story, when Carissa says that pain is a costless way to control behavior or solve problems, basically, like pain itself is a tool. I 100% relate to that feeling. Okay, 90%. I don't necessarily agree with that as far as in the real world we should be hitting each other all the time. But honestly, that's for different reasons. I think if we all had the same philosophy about pain that I do, hitting each other would be fine. But we don't. And I respect other people's preferences enough to not advocate for that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Let's see. So I guess there are a couple hypothetical examples to ask you, which we can draw from our story. One that I asked you earlier in the conversation, and I think you went away and stroked your chin for a while and came up with your more fleshed out position that you've presented here. Is I wondered, like, if you lived in Galarian, would you take a vacation down to hell to be tortured? Weekend trip.
I honestly cannot say that I wouldn't with certainty. And that was the thing I was thinking about a lot during this discussion. Was Carissa thinks the pain she will experience in hell is appropriate. It is lowercase g good, because she will come out of it more perfect, or she will be being made more perfect as a result of the pain. The pain is instrumental in that case. And if I did have the belief that the pain that they were going to serve me in hell was pain that would perfect me, that would make me better, closer to the ideal me, a godly me, if that was what my ideal was, I probably would take a vacation to hell.
All right. What if the only thing you get at the end is that you can jump 1 inch higher?
Am I going to be fired from my job because I have been absent from work?
No,
The
it's a weekend.
centuries it takes to
No,
perfect you
this
in
is
hell.
this is the weekend version. You go there only for a weekend, so you don't become perfect. You just jump a little higher.
I mean, sure. That sounds like a more productive weekend than most of my weekends.
Well,
Like, what did
from
I
my
do last
perspective, that's a
weekend?
very bad deal, but okay.
I played some role playing games and ate cheese. That I think was roughly my. Okay, that's not true. I also edited this podcast for an inordinate amount of time, so that was very productive.
Secretly, I was offering you the same deal this whole time by letting you edit the podcast.
Yes. But for those weekends that I do just sit around and eat cheese, if I could come out of that weekend being able to jump a little higher, with no cost other than just spending that weekend doing nothing other than being in terrible pain, I'd do that. I'd take that deal. That sounds great. Can I do that for like all my skill points, all my stat points?
I'm taking a 20 on this one.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I
so
mean,
the other
people. Well, okay. I can't say that I would do that because I have motivation problems, and I technically could choose to do that any weekend. I could go to the gym and lift weights, or go swimming, or do something that is working out, making my body better. And for whatever reason, I just choose not to do it. And it's not because it hurts, it's just because I'm lazy. I don't want to do that.
But in this hypothetical, devil appears to you and is like, hey, free weekend in hell. You want to come? You get to jump higher at the end.
So long as in the contract, I get to come home at the end of the weekend and not deal with hell regarding this particular transaction ever again.
Sure, right.
Then yeah, I'd do that. I'd do that in a heartbeat.
You can tell from my laughter that I definitely would not do that. But
I might do that even if I couldn't jump a little bit higher. Because that just sounds fascinating. How many people get that opportunity to like go to hell for a weekend and come back from it? Like, I would be so unique. I would have so much social clout. Right?
No one will ever believe
that
you.
Guy who can withstand hell.
They'd be like, "Oh yeah, you've been to hell? Jump slightly higher then." And you go, "Oh, I can't. No."
Don't you see this headband I'm wearing? Right? That definitely gives me +4 intelligence. You want to try it? No, of course not. It's my headband. As would say all wizards.
Yeah. So the second hypothetical scenario is if you would stick your hand in the evil bag of holding. And I guess the two hypotheticals are if you would get spell silver and if you wouldn't get any spell silver.
Well,
and you get healed at the end.
That is the thing, because I was also actively thinking about that when I read that section of the book. And the conscious thought that went through my mind was, is Carissa's hand actually getting maimed, or is this a simulation of that pain? Because I totally would put my hand in that bag if my hand were not getting maimed.
Well, you get healed perfectly by the wizard.
And then I remembered that she gets healed perfectly by the wizard, and the conflict in my mind went away. I would absolutely put my hand in that bag if I could get my hand perfectly. I don't even care if there's spell silver in there. That's so cool. Who would not want to interact with something so cool as an evil bag of holding?
What if it was the least cool version of an evil bag of holding? I don't know.
You mean like it could only hold a pocket watch?
Like it's just a mouse trap. You still get healed though, but nobody thinks being healed is nobody thinks being healed is like special. It's just like a regular doctor who puts a Band-Aid on it, and that just works.
Well, if the Band-Aid just works, that's,
Mhm.
I mean, that doesn't really change the scenario for me. If the because
Right,
Band-Aids
right.
don't work in the real world, and that's why I don't stick my actual hand in actual mouse
Right.
traps. But
Right.
I might if I could just stick a Band-Aid on it and it, be just as good as before I stuck it in the mousetrap.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah,
I
so
guess I have technically mousetrapped my hands by accident, but it was a small mousetrap, so it's just like, ow. I guess that happens.
yeah, I haven't, I think, mousetrapped my hands, but I've definitely stapled my fingers.
Mm.
That was exciting, and by exciting I mean incredibly painful. But I look back on that moment fondly because I
Well,
think, like, I don't know that I'd be able to do that today.
but when you were doing it, did you look at it fondly? Like,
When
I've
I was,
been stay.
I mean, I did it,
Oh,
didn't I?
oh, you
I
did it on
actually
purpose.
I actually
Okay.
don't remember what circumstances led to me stapling my finger.
Mm.
I definitely did not like it after the fact. I can admit to that. Uh, but again, I think the primary reason was that it's distracting to have a staple in your finger. you
That's
know,
certainly true.
your body is
Certainly true.
screaming at you, stop doing that, and there's nothing I can do.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean,
Well, you can
I can
get the
take the
staple out.
staple out, but it's still going to give me that same sensation because there's a hole in me. I'm damaged.
Well, what about in the period between when the staple is in and you haven't yet taken it out? To me, that also seems unpleasant, even though the pain is perfectly justified. And like, hey, get the staple out of your finger.
Well, that's the thing, is that the pain is perfectly justified. I have
Well,
the
yeah,
ability to do something about it, to do something with it, and I could sit there and stare at my finger for a little bit. And honestly, I probably did because
right.
it would have been very surprising, a sensation I had never felt before. What the hell do I do with this? But then at some point, that screaming of pain would become loud enough and I would be like, I'm bored. I don't want to be doing this anymore. I don't want to be looking at my finger, which has a staple stabbed through it anymore. Please get this staple out of my finger. Uh, and then afterward, why am I still being told that there's a staple in my finger? There is not. I cannot do anything. Shut the hell up. Right. And
Right.
that's what I don't like. I don't like it being distracting. And that's what I would call suffering, which is different from pain. It's, a thing happening to you that you don't want to have happen to you.
Right. Okay. Well, that's about all I have to say on that topic, and also all of our feedback for this week from the
Yeah. I
audience.
oh wait, I did make notes on things I wanted to say about this particular topic.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I said the part about the hangnail, and I said the part about somebody with very strong perfume, which I didn't actually. That wasn't one of my notes. My note was about something very sweet or sugary, but because you can also get overwhelmed by sweetness and just be like, I do not want any more Jolly Ranchers. Thank you very much. And the other comment was, oh, right. The essence of free will was, I listed a handful of things like pain that I think are and should be treated the same. So there's pain, there's quote unquote pleasure, because I think that's poorly defined. There's anxiety, which is, I am not currently achieving my goals. Please act in a way that will help me achieve my goals. That's anxiety. And sometimes anxiety happens when there's nothing you can do to achieve your goals more. Like, it's not instructive. And there are drugs for that, which is nice, so that you don't have that anxiety. There's heat. There's orgasms, right? Orgasms are fun when I want them.
Mhm.
I may be alone in this, but I do not want to be orgasming every minute of every day, particularly when I have something that I need to do, like edit this podcast.
Right.
I don't want to be orgasming the whole time. But yeah, having those sensations and choosing how to act is the essence of free will. And if you remove any of those sensations, I did say this already, but specifically, if you remove them without removing your effectiveness at implementing the optimal response to that same sensation. So again, in the case of pain, that would be, you know that this will damage you. Do a thing that will make it not damage you. That's reducing your free will. If you can make that choice without having a sensory input that allows you to see the alternative, basically. And I think that is the end of my quotes I
That
wanted to.
sounds a little weird, but I guess, it is the case that when you say touch a very hot thing and your hand jerks away from it, I am told it's a scientific fact that the signals do not actually go all the way up into your brain or your consciousness or wherever it is they're supposed to go, and it's literally an involuntary retraction of your arm that happens.
So my arm is
itself.
reducing my free will then.
Well, yeah, like
saying.
you
I
don't
want
have
to
free
put my
will
hand in that fire, but my arm is saying, stop it, stop it, stop it.
Yeah, I
and
think
if my arm gets to say that before I control it, then yes, my free will is reduced.
I think you can, override that, but it is literally an involuntary action, which
and the fact that people call it involuntary,
right,
they recognize that that's a that is, you have less free will when that happens.
Yeah. We could go into a whole thing about free will, but we don't have time for that.
I mean, that's the whole essence of this story, ultimately, right?
When you say free will, I'm just listening and hearing will, and that's fine by me.
All right.
Yes. Okay. Well.
Cool.
Good. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Adios.
Bye.
We can decide whether or not to include that in the recording later.
Yeah. Well, it was good radio either way.
I think
whether
so.
it's a digression or a core part. You do remind me that way back at the beginning of this book, Keltham references price discrimination, which is a concept I didn't know about until I took an econ class in college. So everybody pause the podcast and go take a college level econ class and then come back. You don't have to do that, but it would help.
So welcome back, everybody.
Yeah.
I hope that has made some things more clear for you. So I noted this post that is linked out is it's a summary of a conversation, which is just sort of like a back and forth as to why do we trade. And then Eliezer saying like, okay, but pretend that's not how we trade, or why we trade. So I have this in short notes, so I'll just go through those quickly if that's all right.
Oh yeah, sure. In fact, probably people won't need to take the econ class anymore.
Oh yeah. Now that they already have, let's give them this conversation. Okay, so proposition is that different people value things differently, and trading increases net happiness, which Eliezer counters with, okay, but pretend we all value things equally. Should we still trade? Proposition, trading allows you to get resources where they can be best exploited, such as seeds to the fertile land. And to build things, you need components from different sources. So you trade so you can get all that together. To which Eliezer says, okay, but let's pretend that Star Trek style transporters exist. So there's no cost of travel and anyone can get materials from any source instantaneously. So proposition trading allows people who are better at farming to do the farming, basically for people to give people who do the things best the things that they can do best in order to profit off that. And Eliezer's counter here is, I think, interesting. He says, pretend there is no genetic component to aptitude, basically, that everyone can be just as good a farmer as anyone else. There is no, like, I inherently have been born talented at X, or I have been raised by my father to be an X. So just imagine that doesn't exist. So proposition trading allows people to specialize so they can get better at farming, etc. So for example, if Jane and Joe both spend 1 year farming and 1 year cutting trees, they have 2 units of food and 2 units of wood. But if Jane spends 2 years farming, she is slightly more productive in year 2, so she can make more than 1 unit of food in that year. And likewise, Joe can make more than 1 unit of trees cut in that year. So they end up with more than 2 together. To which Eliezer says, okay, well, pretend that they can share their expertise via matrix-style brain dumps, your I know Kung Fu type brain downloads. So in that case, proposition, everybody can get better at everything, and so you don't need to trade. And Eliezer is like, okay, well, that's all I can think of right now, so you win. Oh, wait, come back. I have 2 more scenarios. Oh, crap, you've already left. Okay, exercise to the reader. So there's something that he missed, and he's not going to tell us, which I'm hoping is something that we will find out through this story, whatever those last 2 scenarios were for why there's trade.
I don't think you're gonna find that out through the story.
No, we're not going to see what happens when people have matrix style downloads into their brains.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of story left, but I doubt it will just happen to go in that particular direction to elucidate a corner of a different blog post.
Dang it.
Just referenced for, why do people trade at all? Well, there are a bunch of reasons.
Yeah. So, okay, but that post happened in June 2021. It has been a couple years since then, so maybe he's written a different post. If anybody in our listener base can find those posts, those 2 extra reasons why we trade, send them along. And I'm not going to read them on the air, but I will greatly appreciate it.
I was skimming along, and he's also hypothesized that people are really, really good at switching tasks, which would be my natural objection.
Right.
Like, obviously, I can't, step into the teleporter and then do exactly 1 second of farming on a tiny patch of wheat that I have.
Right. There still is even physical constraints like the seasons.
Yeah, although I don't know if it's maybe he's counting capital. Like, you just need to have a lot of capital altogether to do certain things. Like, I could not actually run a farm as efficiently with a tiny patch of wheat versus a huge farm with the whole irrigation system.
Yeah, like basically only one person has the tractor, right? And so even though they can switch tasks immediately, they can't necessarily get a tractor immediately.
They can task switch. Maybe they can rent a tractor and teleport with it.
That's
and then tractor exactly 1 cubic meter or 1 square meter of land.
Yeah. Yeah. So the obvious problem that you run into when there are people who value things differently is like if you say I will trade you or I value 3 blue just as much as 5 red jelly chips, then somebody will come over and buy your 5 red for 3 blue and make a profit off of that because they value those red a lot more, even than 5 to 3. And Keltham thinks that, or sorry, Dathalon thinks that's bad. That it's bad for people not to exploit every possible profit opportunity. So they're thinking like, okay, well, we need to figure out a way that not only is Adam, who values 5 red and 3 blue the same, gonna feel like he's indifferent, between those. But he also needs to feel good about the trade, like he's winning somehow.
Mhm.
At the same time as Steve, who values red 5 or red 4 to blue 5. I pulled out a couple quotes because there's this math that I don't follow step A to step B, or at least I didn't when I read this. So one is
Dathilan having an average intelligence of 16 or 17, it doesn't take long for somebody to point out that, even if one person likes some jelly chips more than others, that's no reason for them to end up with less jelly chips. Other kids also like some jelly chips more than others. Why shouldn't they be the one to end up with less jelly chips, and I be the one who ends up with more if that's how we're going to play it? Why, yes, Keltham was the first one to say it, in those terms, in his own class when he was very young.
So I had trouble following to this point because the jelly chips are valued differently by different people. Why is it that Keltham thinks that jelly chip red and jelly chip blue are of equal value to the world, basically? Because that's kind of what he's saying, is that not only do you need to trade so that something makes you better off, you also need to restrict that trade to things that only are 1 for 1, which I feel like that doesn't work out if you have different values.
I think maybe I could explain this. If you said that you sort of maybe implied that you had figured it out later.
I don't know if I figured this out later. I figured out, I think, that I figured out that this isn't the right way to think about things later, but the Dathalon section suggests that Keltham thinking about this means it is a reduction of the right way to think about things. And I don't feel like that makes sense. Like, what if the blue jelly chips are literally twice as big as the green jelly chips? Everybody values them at least twice as much, or there is at least twice as much supply of this and the other. Why would you value those 1 to 1? How would you determine what 1 is? Is 1 a 1 by mass, or is 1 a 1 by scarcity, or is 1 just a what you can hold in your hand without being able to break it into 2 hands? This is one of those problems where like discrete versus continuous breaks things a bit.
Right. Yeah,
So,
there's certainly an aspect of that. But I think the general point that's being made is you can have like a set of preferences that you're indifferent between, and then another agent could come along and trade you between your indifferent preferences. And at the end, they would have more of what they preferred. However, they could have made you a different series of trades such that at the end you both had more of what you each preferred. And that's sort of the concept of an economic surplus.
right,
And,
but But
it
how do you
seems fairer
know
that both people.
if you both have some profit, right? Or
Mhm.
some, subjective profit, right? I have
Mhm.
a better ratio of blues to reds.
Mhm.
And that person also has a better ratio of blues to reds from their perspective. How do I know that my ratio of blues to reds is as valuable as that person's ratio of blues to reds if they are both
Right.
surplus? Like, how do I know that their surplus or their profit is fair to my profit if we value things differently? So I
Yeah.
don't think I answered this question with the next section, because I think in the next section in the lecture, they still work with equal value tokens the whole time,
Mhm.
or equal preferences between the different players in the game,
Mhm.
or at least in the later parts.
Um.
I guess they do this part where they have different preferences, but not when they get into the math of making things fair. I think when they get into the math of making things fair, everybody has the same preference, ostensibly. They start
Mhm.
talking about, producing 12 jelly chips, not about producing 4 jelly chips and 4 blue jelly chips and 7 red jelly chips, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
you get rid of the colors when they get into the math, which made me sad because I feel like I didn't get an answer to this question.
Mhm.
How do I ensure fairness when we have different values?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could clear that up for you, but nothing's really
Yeah,
coming to me.
and that comes down to another thing that I've been thinking about the whole time I'm reading this, which is there's a lot of talking about pricing and trading, and when it comes to his shirt, I feel like the reason he shouldn't sell that for $1 million, even if it's valued at $1 million, isn't just because he thinks that's not fair, but also because like somebody offering him that trade assumes everything is for sale.
Why
Like
not?
if somebody
Why not?
comes up to me and says, "Hey, I'll buy your shirt for $1 million or whatever," and it's worth exactly $1 million, even considering you'll have to take it off and toss it at them and then go shirtless for a little while until you get another shirt. If you factor that in and it turns out that it's a not a fair trade, but like you are getting as much money from it as value you would get from having it, I think I'd still say no to that person, because like, look, I'm currently not a merchant, right? This is I do not have a price tag on this shirt right now. I get that you
I see.
guessed my value for it perfectly, which is very impressive, but like, no. Go to an outlet store. Like,
Mhm.
you know
I feel like if people wanted to offer me $1 million, that's a good conversational opening. You don't need to wait for me to put $1 million price tags on my clothing.
well, but if you think your clothes are worth $1 million, right? So if you don't
Yeah.
think you're getting
I mean,
much,
I
if
guess I
any,
wouldn't
profit
sell it.
off of it, right? So like if he
Yeah.
offers you $1,001, technically you're profiting
Yeah.
off that if you value your shirt at $1 million. But even if you're sitting there like at the market with your shirt in front of you with a price tag on it for $1 million, even though you would trade it away then, like people coming up to you and asking for a trade. It's kind of a similar problem with the Keltham being a Karen problem. It's just, I ain't got time for that, right? Like, I don't want to be
Uh,
a merchant every hour of every day. And
yeah.
that's sort of what I think would be incentivized when you think in these terms,
Mhm. Mhm.
particularly if you know there to be large gaps between what you value something at and what somebody else values something at. If that is ever the case, that people have different values, then there's just way too much I say this like it's a bad thing compared to the real world, when I know that people socializing is kind of a problem we have right now, at least in my area. And people socializing would be a good thing. But I feel like that would be a bit too extreme if you had constant social interactions just because people value your stuff differently than you do. That's just sort of in the back of my mind. I'm sure that there's a way they have their world arranged so that doesn't become a problem. I hope.
Maybe they just
that's
all
one of those.
enjoy making deals, you know?
Maybe that's it, or maybe they just all have equal values for things.
Nah, that can't be right.
I do have a personal experience with being that weird guy who puts numbers on things, and it's kind of a sad story, a little bit. I had a friend who I liked arguing with back in the day, and this was around 2016. You know, the good old days. And the election was coming up, and we were talking about like what's going on with Donald Trump. Should people vote for him? How terrible would it be? What's going to happen? What'll be the repercussions? And we had a disagreement about that. And it was a rather vehement disagreement. And it was kind of the sort of thing where, you know, somebody is wrong on the internet, that degree of argument between us. And I'm like, I like this person. And I feel like if we keep arguing about this, we're going to hate each other forever. And so I said, okay, wait up, hang on. I will give you $10 if such and such happens. If you will commit to giving me $1 if such and such else happens. Or I forget what the ratio was. But the thing was, I put numbers on things and attempted to leave it up to some degree of randomness, which is things that we can't control, basically. And I was very shortly thereafter blocked by this person, and I have not talked with them ever since. So yeah, being that weird person is not necessarily costless, and yeah, I still feel bad about that. But I believe that. Some people do not believe that. Apparently, putting your money where your mouth is really is hard for people. Even if you like give them numbers such that it works, like, you know, hedging. Like if the thing they don't want to happen will happen, then they get money, or something like that. I still don't like it. Don't like it. Regarding sharing returns from potentially asymmetric amounts of work, I think.
If Keltham has understood correctly, Cheliax considers the obvious game solution to be even splits of jelly chips, irrespective of work difficulty, which is repeatedly randomly unfair, and hence asymptotically fair. Going into any one game, you are equally likely to get faced with a harder or an easier task for your fixed payment, and if you repeat that often enough, the expected unfairness as a fraction of all payments will drop as the square root of the number of repetitions. It's not actually too bad, as solutions go.
Yeah.
I really liked that line, and because I like asymptotes, and I think it summarizes why we are converging on this idea of there are very simple solutions to this that Keltham is just trying to make more complex, so that he can generalize. I had a very nice interaction with some movers a few months ago, I think it was. My car's battery had died, and I was having no success trying to jump it with my friend's hybrid car, because hybrid cars are not good for that shit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the way the battery connects to the engine, and such. Like I believe you can jumpstart a hybrid car, but you can't use a hybrid car to jumpstart another car. Which again, we've
Wow.
got this asymmetric relationship, right?
Yeah.
But so I gave up on that friend. And went to just like look for a random person on the street, and there happened to be some movers a few houses down from where I live, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll help you out." And they started walking toward my car, and I'm like, "Wait, aren't you gonna get your car here or something? Does somebody have a car that is not a hybrid that can jumpstart?" And then I remembered that, like, oh yeah, Jumpstart is called that for a reason. And my car happens to be a manual transmission.
Oh.
And so they just came over, and one of them hopped in the driver's seat. The other, I think there were three of them. The other two got behind and started pushing. And about 20 feet of road later, they jammed it into second, and vroom, vroom, my car's running. I
Nice.
didn't realize it could go like that little amount of speed and distance in order to jumpstart it, but apparently it can. These guys were effectively professionals at this because apparently they came from I think Russia, and they had to jumpstart cars very often in the winters specifically. So they were like, "Oh yeah, we all know how to do this." But anyhow, I that happened, and I was like, "What can I give these guys? They just did me this great favor. I feel like I owe them something, because they were actually, in the middle of helping somebody move. So it's
Right.
like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Give them pizza and beer? They're getting
Yeah.
pizza and beer out of this, I'm sure.
If they're movers, they might not be getting pizza and beer.
Well, right. They're probably going out for pizza and beer after. Let's be honest.
It's a professional
Any
hazard.
mover, I'm sure that's a
They
thing all
just
movers do.
every day they're like, I wish we could stop eating it, but it's tradition.
It's tradition. Yeah. And I had to be on my way anyway, so I couldn't like invite them over or anything. And they were just like, no problem. We do this all the time. So that was a very kind interaction that left me feeling a little guilty. Lovely.
Yeah, it's a fellowship of man going on right
Fellowship
there.
of man. Yeah, I wrote some equations in my notes.
Ooh.
Back in the.
Are your notes handwritten then? Or
No, it's terrible. They're inline equations in plain text.
well,
Yeah.
as long as you don't need anything fancy, that's fine.
Yeah, I wrote some equations in my notes.
Ooh.
So Keltham's solution to the fairness problem is you like add up all of the possible worlds in which people have joined this project in different orders, and then divide that by people's contributions or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, that solves some of these problems, but again, it only solves the problems where people value things the same, where you're talking in terms of currency. But this does not solve the red and blue jelly chips problem, which is really the one I want the solution to. Like, how do I get the right trade in jelly chips so that I am getting just as much subjective value out of this as my partner is?
Yeah. I wonder if he thinks that's already supposed to have been solved by something we just didn't notice earlier. Or if, maybe later there would be a lecture where he's like, and now I'm going to tie it all together, folks.
Yeah, it's...
maybe if you learn what's fair, the fairness algorithm, then, you just bring your subjective preferences to the table with it.
Yeah. It's just... Yeah, it's because, again, you have hidden information. And hidden information is fine when everything is correlated with currency. But if you're bartering jelly beans, how do I sum my value in a way that is comparable to your value? It's like, okay, well, let's add up all the blue jelly chips that we would have together and add up all the red jelly chips and then divide by the contributions to this transaction or whatever. But, at the end of that, it's like, okay, well, you still have red jelly chips and I still have blue jelly chips, even though I like red jelly chips more than blue jelly chips and you like blue jelly chips more than red jelly chips. What did we do wrong?
Yeah.
How do we find the optimal transaction here and then scale that to the point where we have actually come to equilibrium with each other, or with our respective preferences? Yeah, I think the solution that he had is just only make trades that you want to make, or only make triangular trades that leave you better off, which, especially when he then introduces the idea of one person having everything being an optimal solution. That does not sound satisfying.
Yeah, I feel like somewhere in this story will be, or has been, the solution to your trouble, but I'm afraid you'll just have to keep thinking about it.
Scour it.
I don't know. I mean, there's a diminishing returns to rereading. But
yeah, it's
your valiant task of working it out for yourself is, I hope you're finding it psychologically rewarding.
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I do enjoy math, as I have said before. Yeah, I think so. In the solution that Keltham comes up with later, he notes that it is the only solution that mathematically adheres to these 4 requirements for fair trade. Right. And importantly, it does not take into account anybody's current net worth. So trade is just as fair with PepsiCo as with your neighbor, the same transaction, which feels wrong to me when we're talking about. Sorry, that could be right when you have equal values when you're talking about currency, but that really doesn't feel right when you have uneven preferences, because how do you judge that the utils somebody gets out of this many blue jelly chips, whether that is worth the utils that I get or that I lose by trading away those jelly chips, if we don't have the same utility function? And I think the only way you can do that is, like, objectively, I think, or in anything resembling objective, is to consider their current assets and relate them to their stated preferences. Because their stated preferences just tell you relative values. But if you look at their net worth and you compare the value or the amount being traded to their net worth versus the amount being traded to your net worth in your utility function, that will have it should at least add information regarding your utility functions to the transaction, and that doesn't meet those properties. It is, I don't think that is possible while it's still being I don't think that's possible in a way that makes transaction A then transaction B give the same result as transaction B then transaction A. I think is specifically the main point where it breaks down.
So is it like a problem of diminishing returns?
I mean, I feel like that is one of the ways you can incorporate net worth into the equation, is look like if I'm giving you 2 jelly chips and you have 30 of them, the marginal value of that is a smaller percent of your net worth than of mine, who I only have 10 jelly chips right now, and I'm giving away one of them in exchange for whatever. That is a much greater portion of my net worth. And I don't think it would be controversial to say that in a situation like that, it is of greater delta utility to the person with the lower net worth than it is to the person with the greater net worth.
But I
right.
mean, you could just imagine like a case where there is no diminishing returns, because it's maybe you have 10 jelly chips and I have 100, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna be happy for 10 days eating these jelly chips.
Well, I mean, the thing is that in this situation, any diminishing returns would be on your utility function, not on the jelly chips themselves. There's still the same number of jelly chips, whether it's added on top of person A or on person
B. But I'm saying you can just imagine, like, you can use the jelly chips in a way such that they don't have diminishing returns to their utility. Like, you will be happy. You will be 1 unit of happiness if you eat 10 jelly chips in a day. So I will just be happy for 10 days.
But they're blue jelly chips instead of red jelly chips. So if it's 10 jelly chips in a day, then but that then means it's relative to your ability to be satisfied by a jelly chip in this amount of time, right?
Right.
Like if I trade you 10 jelly chips, 10 blue jelly chips, and you trade me 5 red jelly chips, and I can be satisfied by eating 1 red jelly chip a day, whereas your satisfaction is based on being able to eat 2 blue jelly chips a day. That might be an equitable transaction, but if you do not have that specific balance of available jelly chips for trade or whatever, that still gives you fundamentally a objective measure, a common measure, rather, not necessarily objective. But that sort of comparison of like, okay, I will be satisfied for X days is still a common measure. You're making a currency out of days in that case,
right?
And or like degrees of satisfaction, but those are still relative to your utility function. And so what does satisfaction mean to you? And is your delta satisfaction equivalent to my delta satisfaction?
And if it is, then that would make the trade fair. And the problem is you can't tell what the other person's utility function is.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think hypothetically, you're just supposed to like be honest about that.
Well, you can be honest about your preferences, your relative preferences for blue over red or red over blue. But you can't be, quote unquote, honest about the absolute utility it provides you unless you have a baseline for what utility is. What is 1 util? And that feels different for one person than it does for another person. Like the units by which our utility functions are measured are hidden information, and they almost definitionally cannot be compared.
So would your problem be solved if I just stipulate that actually that part is fine and we definitely know exactly how happy we are, and it's 1 util is exactly, we all know somehow God gave us that knowledge that one of my utils is exactly as happy as one of your utils?
in that case, then as long as you have a way to translate absolute numbers of jelly chips into utils, sure.
Okay.
But I think it'd be difficult to determine utility functions or to define utility functions in ways that would reliably not result in situations where for one person who is almost biologically almost identical to another person, one of them gets 30 utils out of a single red jelly chip, and the other person gets 2 utils out of a single red jelly chip. And it's like, those are the same jelly chip.
Yeah, but one of them would just prefer it more strongly, yes.
Well, do they prefer it more strongly? Or is their definition of util off by some constant factor?
We've just stipulated it can't be off. Unless you're saying, like, okay, we've addressed the stipulation, but now you don't think it's, like, possible for the stipulation to ever achieve. I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm having trouble working out this hypothetical in my head.
I also can't remember if we were, like, supposed to not be allowed to have currency, or if we were supposed to be allowed to have currency.
Well, they were talking about negative wrist slaps, right?
Right. Yeah. So I guess it's all licit.
Let me see
what we're doing here.
Keltham wasn't expecting them to go off and immediately start setting up games to simulate the thing he was describing, despite the absence of actual jelly chips. He'd sort of wanted to see if imagination would be enough, but he's not going to stop them if they do that. He draws the line at the wrist slaps, though. The point of positive rewards in this case is that there's an incentive to play the game at all.
So they talk about wrist slaps. They talk more about wrist slaps and good versus evil, or and then we talk about beating children and putting $1 in the beating jar, in the domestic violence jar.
I don't think they return to the topic in short order, so
no,
I don't think it's worth your time to skim forward. I think we can just assume that it's fine if we want to imagine there's some common unit of conversion like the util.
Yeah. But yeah, I have another thing that I noticed about this, like the ultimatum game, basically, but also with the probabilistic solution, is that, like, if you think of it as a merchant setting prices and a consumer choosing whether to buy something, the probabilistic system sort of shifts any downside in the transaction to the consumer. Like the seller will never sell at a loss, because people who would transact at a lower price just don't transact. And that means the seller misses out on that transaction, but they still have the thing that they would be selling. And so they don't. So I put down some abstract math here, which I'm going to try to reinterpret. So I'm saying that Keltham is basing this off the ultimatum game. So, like, in this, somebody should be setting the price or at least proposing a price, not necessarily saying what their values are, and their personal values should be baked into the price. So if he values his shirt at 1 million, he should value not trading it away for an additional up to whatever the halfway point is. So 4.5 million, I guess, in this case. And so if he sets the price there, but thinks that other people might value it at 10 million, he can anticipate the fair value being 5.5 million and set the price there. So it's like he thinks other people value it more, and so he, in turn, values it more, even if that value is mostly sort of arbitrage, I guess. Is that kind of what this is?
I I don't really know where you're getting this from. What are you talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about the situation where Keltham's the one who is selling his shirt.
Right.
So he ultimately needs to be the one to set the price. Because this is one of those currency things again, isn't it?
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me that they negotiate on a price, but in the end, if he has the shirt, he's the one who gets to say if the deal goes through.
So okay, but the merchant should never price for less than they value it, obviously.
Yeah.
And they're also disincentivized here from offering less than fair because it's kind of like throwing away money if you price low when you know the fair value is higher, right?
Yeah. Are we assuming this merchant only has one object?
I think so.
Okay. Sure.
Or maybe not. Does it matter?
It only. Well, I don't actually know if it matters, but it matters in terms of what kind of explanation you would give about it, I suppose. Like, if the merchant has a lot of things, they might set the price lower just so they can sell more and make a greater total profit. Although I guess, that would end up also being the fair price, just
Yeah,
arrived at in a different way.
Yeah, I guess that is going to be something that is calculated in a different way, and they would have to incorporate some other way. So this equation isn't everything, basically. And a merchant might have competition, right? So, like you said, if you lower the price, you get more people to buy, but also you get more people buying from you specifically instead of competition. So that gets incorporated. Although, like the competition thing, that is something you could like get insurance for, maybe.
Ooh,
Right?
my monopoly insurance.
Right, monopoly insurance. Because like when you are the shoe seller, the only shoe seller in town, you have what you expect to be, this steady business thing. But there is always going to be some possibility that, the cleric from the nearby city for values of near is going to teleport in another shoe seller or a batch of shoes and compete to put you out of business. Although, again, business is stretching the situation here. But you could like have insurance that would allow you to price lower in order to keep up with competition, maybe. But she has some things to learn about pain as well, I guess. Well, okay, but also, how do you punish like capitalists who are always going to trade unfairly or only going to trade unfairly because they don't have any concern about being punished in any price way? Like they just won't possibly ever spend enough money that they will not have lots of money. So, your PepsiCo, you will never be able to take down PepsiCo because they can continue setting prices at whatever the heck they want. Because even if people don't buy that, they're not going to lose anything because they have just acres and acres of piles of physically manifested labor hours. That are never going to go down, really. So I think in that situation, you still have to, or not have to, but I think pain is still useful, right? You get your guillotines out at some point.
Yeah, my interpretation of this sort of exchange was like Keltham sort of ends his comment by talking about, or includes in his comment, sort of like a tit for tat equilibrium thing. And then I interpreted Carissa as thinking, well, that's only true if you ever let them hit back. after you hit them the first time by being, the most powerful tyranny.
Oh, I somehow that hitting back, I did not interpret that as hitting back against a punishment. I interpreted that as hitting back against the unfairness to begin with. So yeah, the like retaliation to retaliation. Yeah, that just describes war. Basically, that'll escalate. Yeah, but the configurations are of orders in which people join this corporation. Is that right?
I think so. There's a bunch of math that goes on, and eventually, it seems like they're trying to figure out like all the different possible ways people could join the corporation, and if order doesn't matter, you just divide out the order again.
Yeah. I their calculation. So the first one didn't go so well, and so Keltham needed to change it from what was it, even distribution or something. He changed it so it's tokens that produce or not that produce 2, 3, and 5, but that when combined produce products of their numbers that are 2, 3, and 5. So specifically uneven, but a smaller version of this. And I think they all got it wrong, is what I noticed.
Oh.
And they corrected each other, but I think this might just have been, I don't know if this was an honest mistake on Eliezer's part, or if I completely misinterpreted it. But the way Keltham described it was that the tokens only produced things when they are brought together, and their calculations they seem to take into account a value that existed before the tokens came together. So, like if you've got a 5 token, they're valuing that at 5, and so when the 2 token comes along, they measure the delta as 5. But actually, when the 2 token comes along, it would go from 0 to 10 because the 5 doesn't produce anything on its own. So I think all their numbers were off. But that is just me arguing with the math. I think aside from that, their logic eventually converged on the right thing. Just the premise they were going with was not what Keltham described.
I have to say I didn't track it that closely.
Yeah, again, this is another I love math situation where I sat down and worked this out for like each time one of them proposed a solution. I'm like, okay, well, how did they get that? Scribbled down in the margins. That is the correct answer. Let it go when somebody tells you there are problems with the universe that say we can't tell you something.
That does remind me of how earlier I was thinking about how it didn't list out all of the answers that were given, and so I lost track of it. So I guess, maybe we are the universe, and they successfully destroyed them before I personally figured out if there was anything interesting going on there.
We got a handful of answers, but most of them were actually, I think all of the ones we got were from named characters. And I don't know if we've ever gotten a definitive count of how many Heramites there are.
Oh, I think we might have, but I don't know.
Well, supposing not, Keltham destroying the papers before we can read them all means that remains hidden information.
He has a quantum superposition of Heramites.
Indeed.
They'll collapse when narratively necessary.
Yeah, when they were first introduced, like the closest we got to how many there were, I think, was just that they were packed in 2 or 3 to a big stuffed chair, right? And I kind of wonder, like, if we've met all of the Heramites, which of them were sitting together when he came in? Who are the good friends?
Yeah, Did any of them know each other? They don't really act very much like that, but maybe they just don't mention it.
Well, Ione and Paxti, at least, they probably are close. They've got their banter going on that suggests they know who each other is.
Yeah, also these were all like students at the same school who I guess were all selected from like the top of the same class. So logically they would all know each other. But they're never like, hey, remember that time when blah blah blah,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell.
Keltham has been, as far as I can tell, the only one asking them about who they are.
Mhm.
Right? We've only really seen from Keltham's perspective when interacting with them, aside from like Ione's individual asides, but they don't really interact with each other that much except when negotiating answers to Keltham's questions.
Right. Right. And in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, in some of their introspective little backstories, they talk about like being in classes, but they don't really mention like any of the other people who are here who would logically have been in their classes. They're just like, I always stayed in the middle of my class so as not to be noticed.
Yeah. Well, we did get somebody was sold to the school, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like you've got it's one of those ways that you can fight for prestige in a lawful evil society is you just straight up purchase the smartest people for your student body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.